Well, hello, hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of Grow or Die. I am Alora Chestikoff from Firebird Summit.
Hey, everyone. Lawrence Henderson with Boss LLC. It is great to be back once again.
Yes, I know. We feel like it feels like our schedule is kind of like off this season, but I think heading into the holidays, everything gets weirder and
Exactly.
weirder every week.
No,
So, okay, well, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Just came off the holidays, and like you said, it's that season of giving. Um, and I believe you have a good topic for us today. How are you doing?
So the topic that I would like to tackle today is, managing our own triggers. I think, one of the things that is really interesting about getting older is like, we, for the most part, if you've done any, real work on yourself, get clearer and clearer what things just get under your skin. And hopefully, I know that I put a lot of time and effort into managing my inclination to be a hothead and try to get better at that. And sometimes I watch other people and how they're inclined to respond and think, wow, I'm so glad I don't I have a little bit better handle on that now. Other times, man, somebody will say something or do something, and I can feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I am like, and so and I know you definitely are another person who has at times really like struggled to stay on top of your own trigger management. So yeah, I think that's what I'm talking about today. Like, and it's, I think to some extent it's kind of a practical exercise, right? Like what do you do when you're, some of it's very like stupid little tips and tricks kind of stuff. But God, like, yeah, from beginning to end, like if you're trying to manage your own triggers, when you started realizing that, you had to kind of reevaluate how you were responding to things, what was that process like for you? What did you do?
Uh, I know, and I think it having this conversation, like again, for a lot of people, they were like, I don't believe nothing's wrong with me. Well, probably who's been affected by you before, right? How are you influencing the environment you're in? And it makes me think about my time in the military and then my time out of the military, where certain things in uniform were allowed, right? Whether in writing or, folklore, tribal wisdom, right? I was allowed to pop off because when in charge, take charge, and all of the crazy that came with that, right? But then once I transitioned out and I would have a blah moment, like, and if people freaked out, like I thought something was wrong with them, and everybody else was looking at me like something's wrong with you. But then, as an awareness thing for me, that's when I started going deep, and it happened. It was a trigger, and I always go back to this story. One of my buddies, who and there's a certain thing around allowing again feedback, the gift of feedback. It was a moment, and he said to me, he said, Lawrence, he said, you're an extremely gifted leader. He said, however, comma, um, people aren't drawn to you when you cut, when you're trying to give them information, and when you cut trying to pull the information back. He said, so you're cutting both ways. He said, what you're saying, like, it may be totally right, but people can't hear if they're harmed by you. And so it was in that moment that all of the previous conversations that I thought my wife was being super sensitive, it all came back. And I was like, oh my God, she was right the whole time. And I'm so sorry. And I recall running into the house and her giving me the most whatever face that she could come up with in that moment. Was like, so it took somebody else to tell you stuff that I've been telling you for the last 12 years of our marriage. And 4 years later, I'm still getting that same conversation. But yeah, it was really the realization in somebody having to bring something into my consciousness that I was just operating. And again, I am the self-proclaimed, I pick up my own leadership books. I'm self-taught and I study. And I'm like, I got this thing in the bag. And all the while, if I looked back, there was a trail of bodies that I was triggered by certain things, and I was just slaying people along the way.
Yeah. So it's funny. So I had a similar experience. I remember, I don't even remember what the actual event was, but it was one of those it's one of those situations where kind of like everybody knows but nobody says, and nobody tells the boss, like it's some it was some kind of sacred cow something or other that nobody wanted to tell the boss. And I remember like it finally made it up to my bosses and the owners of the company. And I remember one of the three owners looking at me and saying, "But I don't understand. Why didn't anybody tell us?" And in the moment, my reaction was like, "Well, okay, well, I guess that's kind of a fair question." But the flip side of that is, why would you assume you know? Like, you're the boss. Like, do you not understand like the inherent distance that tends to create in like a social hierarchy kind of. And we were in a tech firm, so it's not like it was like a super hierarchical, like, banking or financial institutions that are really rigidly structured. I mean, it was a pretty flat organization for the most part, but even then, like, it was just, there was a general true confusion from his perspective at the idea that the company was too big, or he was seen as too removed to have been like on the receiving end of like that kind of like scuttlebutt that would have given him an idea of some of the stuff that was going on. And I remembered having this moment where I'm looking at him thinking, why would you think he would hear gossip? Like, seriously, you're one of the owners and you're like the boss. Like, don't you know the boss never hears gossip like that? And then fast forward, I was the boss and I made the same mistake as him. I completely thought like, hey, no, my team trusts me. I'll hear. And then after the fact, I'm like, how the hell did I not know that was going on? Holy shit. And the thing is that, over in that period of time, I had gotten better about managing my temper, my reaction. So, earlier in my career, people were, very reluctant to give me news they thought I might have a bad reaction to, because they weren't necessarily confident that I was going to react well. You know, by the time, I was the boss and but still not hearing things, it wasn't even as much at that point about my temper. It was simply the fact that the structure there made it kind of fundamentally unsafe to tell me certain things. And so I had to be able to look at that and say, okay, I can't expect that they're going to. So the most I can do is try to do my own outreach. But in some ways, that actually makes the temper thing even more dangerous, right? Like I've had CEOs who were screamers, like just and I'm working with someone now who has a partner team that has a CEO who just threw a humongous hissy fit in a meeting and then walked out of the meeting and fired one of his directors as a sacrificial lamb just because. And like the thing, and of course the thing he didn't see in the moment is the ripple effect of broken trust that has created throughout his organization. Like he clearly has no idea the kind of damage he just did. But I think that's, I always reference Marshall Goldsmith's, article, it's not a fair fight when you're the CEO. And this is part of it, right? Because when you are the boss, when you are in a leadership position, you already have a little bit more power in a lot of settings than you necessarily realize you have. If you factor in a temper or at least a mistrust of your temper on top of that, I think you're making it super, super unlikely that you're going to hear a lot of really important shit that you want to hear, and you probably assume you're getting. And the problem is that you don't know what you don't know. And so all kinds of stuff happens. It's totally off your radar.
Mm-hmm. No, I love your use of the mistrust of your own temper. And that speaks to a certain level of awareness and even somebody's capacity to even do something about it. And I recall, and I love the analogy of, again, it's not a fair fight when you're the CEO, and that lack of awareness of how people are different with you, not even if in how rooms shut down when you speak, right? And if you speak first, you're not noticing everybody is just saying enhancements of what you just said. They're not saying anything different. They're just solidifying what you said as the thing we're going to do. And to not be present to that, particularly around something like conflict and something like our triggers, like is so dangerous. Like I again, in a family dynamic, like I didn't know my wife, the closest person to me, the person I say I would take a bullet for, she's the first person I would die for, doesn't want to bring hard things to me because of how I had a hissy fit about the last thing, or I immediately went to, why are you attacking me this way? She was like, I just asked you about the sky being blue. That's all I asked you. Did you care that the sky was blue? It's a beautiful shade of blue, right? And but what I heard was, God, why don't you pick up your socks? When are you gonna do a load of laundry? So all the things that came in that person's voice, like everything got triggered. And so as business owners, as leaders, the biggest thing we can do is, like, again, and I have this, we shouldn't do anonymous feedback and surveys. Well, the last time somebody actually said your name in a comment, you pop the cork. Like, so nobody feels safe. You've destroyed, trust is fractured. And so you now have to rebuild that trust in your ability to even be an adult when it comes to receiving feedback. And I believe a lot of times that old analogy is like, people always say, I wear my heart on my sleeves. I think we all do. I think in some cases, when depending on the topic and depending on what it is, if we feel like this is something sacred that we haven't given people an allowance to give us information on, or it's a trigger for us. And one, I had a client, a project manager. I don't even know if I told you about this one. Well, there was a session. I was doing a training session. I thought I'm giving them my best. And at the end, it was like she gave this like PSA announcement around the objective of what this was supposed to be and all, but all I heard was her attacking my ego. She just ripped apart the last hour of effort that I just put in. She just called me not good enough. So all my imposter syndrome stuff, all that stuff started flaring up, and my daddy's nose flare popped in. And I was like, oh my God, my nose. And I felt it coming, but it was like, I can't stop it. I can't stop it. Daddy nose flare. And it was out there already. And after the session, like she had to stay, and she was like thinking she was giving me feedback, but all I was hearing was, you're not good enough. That sucked. That like, and again, but it was like I showed her the trigger. And it was like that open wound it was a bullet wound I tried to put a band-aid on. And it was in that moment, that awareness, I was like, ooh, I need to call my coach, and I need to work through this. And I sat and I meditated and I dang near wrote a journal worth of notes that night. From that, in that encounter, I never wanted it to happen again, because that was a client. And that was session one of a 12-month contract. Like, I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. So yeah, it's a thing.
Oh, completely. So I love that example because I love that you felt the reaction coming, but even, and I think this is where managing your triggers gets hard, right? Because first step is you have to start understanding what they are so that you're recognizing them. But just because you're recognizing doesn't automatically make them just, manageable. And okay, great. That's what that is. I'm gonna put it on a shelf and make it go away. And the thing is that I think there are also things that we know, right? So you just mentioned imposter syndrome. So, when feedback, sparks that kind of just chord for you, that's how you react. For me, it's the idea that, oh, you're not smart enough, you missed something. And like that just, oh God. And I don't react well at all. Like there will be moments, where I'll get, and it can be in any form, and I feel my reaction. I feel myself stiffen, and I feel my I basically feel like the dictionary, my brain start coming up with like multisyllabic, like condescending responses. And I start writing emails in my head, especially it's the email, which is normal in a work setting, right? Like I start writing emails in my head that are just like evisceratingly vicious. And I have to rein it in. And it's one of those things that is, I think, so easy to kind of feel like, oh, hey, I understand what bothers me now. This is great. And that is great, but that's not the end of the line, because then the question is, what do you do about it? You feel yourself being triggered, right? So you just mentioned a couple things. Obviously, you want to talk to your coach, you got to like find a way to get out. You journaled, you meditated. For me, One of the things that I've really learned to do is not respond right away, if at all possible. I'm especially when I'm working in a client project, I'm usually pretty aggressive about responding to email as quickly as I can. And I have always found that if I feel that reaction and I'm having a well, screw you too kind of response to something, that is not when I need to be writing an email. Like, forget it. Just come back to it, do whatever. Like, don't respond in the moment if you don't absolutely have to. Now, sometimes, you're in person and you're being asked the question right there and you don't have a way around it. But my first go-to is buy yourself some time. Get up, walk around, do whatever you can, or at the very least, just, breathe deeply. My problem these days, when something like that happens is I'm usually on video calls while I'm like reading the email, like I'm multitasking and like reading the email while I'm on a video call. So like I'm trying to keep a poker face because like I otherwise I'm just shooting myself in the foot. So, there's a lot of like stuff about kind of the managing it that's important. But I think the first thing for me is always don't respond when you're pissed.
Yeah, I love that. And what you and again, to get into the coaching part of kind of what we do, and it goes from evaluation of what's happened to observation, right? And you go inward. And again, in that moment, the note that I wrote myself, the physical reaction that I was having when my nose was flaring, I couldn't breathe. My chest got tight. I started sweating. Like I got hot. Like it was like a rage inferno. And I was like, and that's the part that scared me because I was like, it's been a minute since I felt like that. But then it was like, okay, now that I know the body thing is happening to me, what was what was I thinking? Like, so all those thoughts, right? All those thinking traps that I was like, I mean, it was all or nothing. I was catastrophizing. Like, I was like, I'm about to lose this contract. Like I literally was going there in moments. And again, it was like this conflict, this reacting and keeping yourself these triggers. And I was like, what is happening to me? Why am I having this reaction? So it's like, again, the body emotion. I observed what was happening with me, then my thoughts, and then the urge. Like you said, the yet I had an urge to yell. Like is really the nose thing was like, here it comes, like you about to pop a cork. And I was like, okay, I stopped the cork. I kept my mouth shut, and I was like, okay, I ended the session, and I let her talk, which was huge for me because I was like, as soon as this last person gets off, like the urge was, as soon as the last person drops off this Zoom call, I'm going ham. Like I'm about to blow up. But I kept it and I just let her talk, and I tried to stay in coach mode as much as I could, and I had to get it out. I was like, I totally disagree. Like that was the one thing I got out. I was like, I had to get that out. And it was like literally that was the release valve. Once I said I disagreed, I was like, whew, that's all you needed to say is that you disagreed. We'll agree to disagree today. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And it was like, shut the call off. And I was like, oh my God, that was growth. Because I'm telling you, oh Laura, I wanted to go. This is hammer time.
Well, and I think that's actually, I think, another really great point too that you make, right? Is recognizing your physical symptoms, right? So for me, I absolutely so and I think some of us kind of really get stuck. I'm really bad about living in my head, right? I have gone years paying absolutely no attention to how I feel about anything. I can sit and be working for 6 hours with a headache before I notice that I have a headache. I am notoriously and historically terrible about paying attention. The like all of that, like it's been a huge challenge for me to like actually like get back in my body enough to pay attention to what my physical like reaction is to something. And so I'm not always consistent about it. I know but I have definitely gotten better about realizing that just pissed me off, and then feeling what happens, right? I hold my breath, I clench my jaws, I get my back gets really stiff, like I just tighten up, everywhere. The holding my breath thing is the thing that I really, really notice. I've actually bitten my tongue several times from clenching my jaw too hard. Um, yeah, that one's really bad. If things are really stressful, I'll do that in my sleep, which is really when I mess up my tongue. That hurts. But like I just being aware that that's how my physical like reaction to something, manifests itself, which is where I start becoming, oh yeah, that made me angrier than I thought it did, or especially because when I am in a situation where maybe I am multitasker, I'm taking care of a bunch of things or having a conversation with a whole bunch of people, and I'm trying to keep things moving. I'm trying to keep the progress on whatever we're trying to do, but at the same time, the back of my mind's like, screw you, that's bullshit. I don't want to, and I like start, getting all worked up. And so realizing that, yeah, no, okay, you can't talk to your clenched jaw, dummy. Like, and you got to breathe or you're going to pass out. Like, it doesn't actually work. So I think learning to recognize those symptoms was super, super helpful. But I think then the other part of that is for me, the especially the not breathing, is in some ways almost the easiest thing to remedy to help. Because if I stop long enough to take a like true deep breath, it buys me some time to kind of get my thoughts together, but it also like all I can feel like my endorphins like calm down, like everything else in my body starts to kind of relax again, and then I can sort of unclench and move forward. But yeah, that physical reaction, God, that took me so long to recognize that that's what I was doing, and I was doing it all the time. The breath holding thing is like that's the hardest one for me because I can do it for a lot longer than I realize and not notice that I'm doing it. And so that to me has been probably the easiest thing to help like shift how I'm physically feeling. But then to your point, then it's what are the thoughts that got me here, right? Because it's not usually, I mean, maybe 20% of the time, someone was such an overt like jackass that maybe like it's super obvious that they were really being like uh on a more personal attack. But for the most part, I'd say 80% of the time, it was how I took what they said and not what they actually said. And that part is so much harder. And I think your point about what are the thoughts that I walked away from, and what, to like Brene Brown says, right? What's the story I'm telling myself
Mhm.
that has led from that one line in that email they sent to me ready to punch my fist through something? And how did I get there? And starting to kind of walk through whatever those thoughts were, I think is I think it's extremely hard, especially in the beginning when you're first trying to get your arms around that. I actually find that's actually where journaling is really, really helpful, because what I'll do is, okay, this is what, and I've done this a number of times when I was trying to figure out why I was having such an extreme reaction to something that didn't seem that extreme, or something that didn't seem that like that much of an attack or that personal. Is I would write down, okay, this is what so and so said, and then and usually the first couple of this was my first thought, this was my second thought. Usually the first couple are hard, but once I get past maybe the second or third, like whatever that daisy chain is after that usually starts unraveling pretty easily, and then it's really easy to see how I got to a point of being pissed off and defensive. um, but it's a hard discipline to get in the habit of recognizing. And so I think that the journaling thing, to your point, I think it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think what comes up for me as you describe, you know, how you process and how you go through it, it really, and you identified it, it really comes to answering the very objective fact of is this actual a personal attack, or is this conflict that I'm actually experiencing, or like you said, am I having a perceived kind of attack that is not really there? Because you mentioned something, we give voice to word. We literally will read a message in the other person's voice who sent it, and depending on the what we believe the context of the message is, we will read it in the tone in which the last encounter that wasn't a very good one, right? Last time you read email from somebody in a Mickey Mouse voice or Minnie Mouse voice. Like, we don't read emails like that. We don't read emails to laugh, to smile, to assume the best of an email. Like, we read messages to say, oh God, what did I do? Like, that was just a follow-up to the project team meeting. Like, I'm just following up. And
Well,
so,
and it's a person, right? So I think
yeah,
this is the other thing too,
yeah,
right? So if you have someone who is in either you don't like them, don't
yeah,
trust them, whatever,
yeah,
and you get a message of almost any kind,
of any kind.
it's very hard
Yeah.
to assume the worst or not to
Oh my
interpret
gosh.
it in a way that's fundamentally uncharitable. And the truth is, okay, yeah, maybe they are an ass, or maybe they
Yeah.
are political and eager to throw you under the bus if they get the chance. But that doesn't mean that's what that message actually was.
Oh, for sure.
So it can be really hard to start. And it's kind of also like what you said earlier about
Mm,
when you were in the military, right? Some of it's also, there's a very large cultural component here, right? I've worked
hmm
in like, scrappy startup environments where it was okay to lose your temper a little bit, and then you move into more corporate structured, you
Yeah.
know, hyper polite, passive aggressive environments. And
hmm
holy mackerel, you don't do that ever.
I
Ever.
worked in both. In
Right. Me
my
too.
early career outside of the military, how did I end up in both of those organizations in a matter of 3 years? I was like, y'all are schizophrenic on this side of life. I was like, why did I leave the military? Like, I was like, at least I could show up and know what I was getting. Like, absolute crazy on a daily basis. But I said, you all need to be committed. Like that, like that's the world I was living in. And like you said, it was like, whose reality am I living? And like, again, I was like, I didn't know that was a trigger for me. And again, you talk about managing and leading through those kind of triggers is what happens with growth, right? You mentioned like as we age, like our level of care kind of begins to become fleeting. I'm just gonna let this one fly, and you take it how you take it, and we're gonna go from there. And I recall there I had this leader who, and again, flashback military to them, a horrible leader, and they basically, in so many words, told me to shut up and color. And I was like, oh man, you don't even know what you just said to me. Like, you just signed up for World War III. So every message after that interaction, I read it like the last conversation we had, instead of keeping that conversation in the context in which it was. And like you said, read the messages and hear the messages for the moment you're in, not for bringing all of it came. The whole wagon of stuff came, every single email I was reading, like, this mother.
Mm.
And I literally had drew a line in the sand and said, anything they tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite.
Yep. So that's actually a really good technique that I haven't had to use in a while, but in having this conversation, it just reminded me of. So you made a joke about the Mickey Mouse voice, but the reality is one of the things that I think is really helpful, and this is especially true in email, social media, anything else, right? When you're dealing with a written message that's getting under your skin, try to reread it as if it came from your mother or your spouse or your sister or your kid or whatever, and see if you have the same reaction. Like, is the reaction really about the words, or is there something in there that, because of the person it's coming from, is just stick it in your craw in a way that's counterproductive. And so I think that sometimes can be really, really helpful, especially if you find that there are a few people in particular that you're struggling to kind of manage your reaction to. Try looking at it and rereading it like it came from, somebody you love, and see if you react the same way.
I love that um because I imagine all of those messages and it made me smile. If I
Mhm.
would have read it like it came from my mom, I'd have been like, "Oh, mom," like that's how I read the message. Like, and I'm like, "Here we go. All right, mom." But it was funny because this same person, they're LinkedIn creeping me now, and so I saw that they were on my profile, and literally split second, I like went back with the wagon, and it was like, "Really, dude? Really, dude?" And it literally was that, read the message like, ah, they're fanning you. So I like
Yep.
total reframe in that moment was like, instead of them lurking and what they on my profile for, they fanning. Like that, I was like, you got another fan. Like, be excited about a fan. Like I was like, the
Yeah,
total, yeah.
instead of the boogeyman hiding behind the bushes in front of your house, it's actually, the delivery guy showing up with flowers. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. And crazy enough, it's like, right? It's like UPS at night. Like, who's out in front of our clothes in dark clothes? Like, it's the UPS man. Like, what are you talking about? They dropping off packages at night. Like, there's not nobody trying to rob you. And again, the catastrophizing that we don't understand. And again, another thing is the language around what the trigger actually is. And I believe that's a hang up for a lot of people. I know it was for me because early on, before I deep dived into coaching, I had no language for what was happening with me. And being empathy being introduced to me in that context was new because empathy was like, put yourself in somebody else's shoes and experience life their way and understanding. But to say it that way as it pertains to effective communication, I was like, that's a thing. And so I went to researching that. And again, now I get dictionary.com words of the day, like sent to my text to my phone. Like, and because I want to dig into context. And am I staying in the moment and actually using and communicating with people based on now, not based on, and again, if I'm asking about something previous, I'm being careful and mindful about making sure they understand specifically where I'm talking about so we could bring this thing forward if it makes sense to bring it forward. If it doesn't, leave it there. But making sure that we're having conversations about the moment we're in so we could be present together and we can have the same conversation. Because I believe not having language is probably that's what's been happening over the last 6 months as we talk about social injustice, political issues, family issues, where people stand. Like literally you have people who are on spectrums when we just need to sit still and just be like, okay, where are we with this? And then talk to people like we love them.
Yep.
Simple as that.
Well, and listen to them like we do. You
Say it
know,
louder for the people in the back. Like, listen.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, right? So what I love about what you just said also about the language part, right? I think it's true. Diving into coaching training for me, the one of the things that was the most useful was putting a language around my triggers, right? I we all have buttons, right? We all have our own triggers, but being able to say, okay, look, I know now in a way that I can articulate to myself, if not always to everyone else, but at least that, okay, I know that these, three or four things are knee jerk triggers for me. That doesn't mean I always have to respond and not, but once I can start putting language around that, then it's much easier to be able to say to my partner, hey, look, I know that, we were wherever we were and I had this reaction. When you see me doing this, please just poke me in the rib cage because I really like mentally checked out. I went into autopilot. And I think that's one of the hardest things about dealing with triggers is that until you start putting a language around it and you start having an awareness in the moment, you start recognizing your physical symptoms, you start recognizing those things. A lot of times we're just on autopilot, and you can't break a habit until you are able to actually start figuring out how to stop yourself from acting on it in the moment. And it's so difficult to do. And so putting language around it, whether it's talking to a coach, whether it's journaling, whatever it is just an invaluable step. And being able to say, okay, yeah, I'm ready to break something over that person's head right now. I clearly need to find a way to end this phone call and go out and take a few deep breaths. But until you can do that, it's just, it's so easy, right? I used to remember how much I would fly off the handle about stuff. And I was so unaware for so long that, hey, dummy, you're yelling and everybody in the office can hear you. Well, that's just rude. But like I wasn't aware enough, you know, that that's what I was actually doing. And it takes time. And I think that's maybe the other thing is that, especially when you get started, it's can seem really huge and really overwhelming. To me, it's kind of like meditating. You know what? You need to start doing it. You can't expect results in a month. You probably can't expect results in a year, quite honestly. You're gonna have to keep at it and keep at it. And part of the value of being able to start articulating it is asking for help from the people you trust, because that is sometimes, how many times has your wife or, somebody in your family that you love and you trust said, dude, what are you getting so worked up about? I wasn't attacking you. And then only then did you realize that your reaction was more forceful and more direct dramatic than the situation maybe warranted.
And I think that really, and that is a perfect level setting, like kind of transition for what we've been talking about as it pertains to triggers. And then again, people, particularly in this season that we're in now, right? People's like, how are we going to lead through change in this new environment? It's grace. It's grace and some mercy. Even when somebody actually flies off, extend them some mercy. Yeah, we know they didn't earn it because they actually deserve every lashing that they get after what they just said. But let's get to the root cause of it, and then actually say sorry for it and actually learn from it and begin to take those steps, not those leaps, those steps towards what right looks like. Because I believe, again, like language, there's no muscle memory around the right behavior, right? Again, you thrust people into these, like you said, it used to just be a job perk to work from home. Now you ain't got no choice. And then you toss in children, you toss in all of this stuff. Like, we were able to take a break from each other for at least 8 hours a day. Now, for 24 hours a day, everything's on the same noodle. Everybody's riding the same wave. I have to be all things at all times to all people. And so those levels, and people actually have probably identified triggers that they didn't even know they had
Oh yeah.
around personal boundaries and personal space. Because again, newlyweds, imagine what they're going through right now. Like, they were dating pre-COVID, and now in marriage, you're like, oh my God, I'm with you all the time now. Even
Oh, I
though,
totally, it's funny. So I was talking to I have a health coach, and I was talking to her about, been having trouble like getting back into a regular workout schedule. It hasn't been just since COVID. It's really been like since I came back to the US last December or last November, but really since COVID, it's been like really bad. And she said, well, but you're also living with somebody now. Like you used to live by yourself and had complete control and didn't have a dog. And now I have, two plus a partner, and we're all in the same house and we're all working from home all the time. And it's like, oh, yeah, you're right. No wonder I have been having a harder time figuring out like how to manage my schedule. And it was funny because like I didn't actually like that part didn't register. I kept thinking, oh my God, I'm now like two time zones back and my clients are ahead. So they all want all my early morning hours, which now is like throwing my schedule like all out of whack. And, and I'm living in the mountains now where it's freezing cold. So I don't want to go out and run because it's only 30 degrees outside. Like, I'm kind of like going through all these other excuses. And she's like, Laura, when was the last time you lived with someone? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's been a while. There's no wonder and like, and I think that's a really good point, right? I mean, I think it was yesterday. He was on the phone dealing with work. I'm on calls and I can hear his voice and I'm like, oh, and I had to shut my office door because like he's got a really loud voice. And so I'm on video calls and everybody can hear him. I'm like, so I'm like closing the door, but that it's like hot in here and I'm sweating because there's no airflow because I closed the door. And it's like all of these like stupid little things that one by one don't really matter, but they pile on top. And by the time I'm done with work at the end of the day yesterday, I'm like pissed off and grumpy, and I'm going downstairs and I'm slamming stuff. And, it's like, oh my God, really, girl? You just like, but again, like those are not things that you necessarily recognize were triggers before. And now it's like, okay, well, yeah, cut everybody some slack, like starting with yourself, but like just, take a deep breath and, whatever, make dinner, do something else, go play with the puppy. I don't know, find something.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things we had to do, even in relationship, just with other people, just the intentionality, right, of communicating desires of interaction, right, and again, just that simple example of being on calls at the same time. This is the first time my wife switched jobs. This is the first time she hasn't been in education since we moved to a location back in 2011, that she like literally voluntarily left education to where she's 100% home with me. And that same thing, I'm like, where are you going to be and do you have calls? It's literally the conversation, right? Because there was a session, I was in a training session, and this mic, we know Yeti mics,
Mhm.
super sensitive and can hear everything. Well, every now and again, she gets playful and she whispered something. And I was like, oh my God. And like, you see, just what your face is doing, their faces did. And I'm talking about livid beyond livid. Like, I couldn't get them to break out rooms fast enough. Like, I was like, but it was just like that trigger. And it was like, why? It was like, why? Like, why that? Like, why was that a thing? And it was boundaries, disrespect. But again, had it been communicated? But in our minds, we rationalized before, it shouldn't have had to be.
Yeah.
I'm doing my job. It shouldn't have had to be. Well, again, we're all doing things that we've never done before. Why do you assume and why do you think that was something that didn't need to be talked about? Or
Oh,
even something that needed to be help people remind people of. And so now what do? Preparatory command. Hey, I have a couple sessions today with clients. Preface with clients. So my door is going to be shut. You can come in because the way my desk sits now, you could sit on the couch, right? And so those are the things that I'm like, Jesus help me. Like literally, it was in that moment. I was like, it was fear, it was fright, it was anger, it was all the things popped up. I was like, and I couldn't look over in anger at her. Like you said, had to keep a straight face. And I'm like, oh my God, my heart was in my stomach. Right. So I think triggered, like this is a good one for this, particularly this holiday season, right? We're in between and unknowns of 2021, unknowns of a new president. And all of these things are going to happen for people. And I believe just the skill set, like you said, if I believe if anybody starts this work, just identifying and being mindful of just what's happening with your body. Like if you could start there just with that observation and then transition to the thoughts and begin to write them and make it real so you could create your own language around what this stuff is. I think that would be a good start. I don't know what you think.
no, I think that's a fantastic start. I also think there's, my fiance is a hothead too, and it's funny to watch because I'll watch him react to something, and I'm like, oh, I remember having that kind of reaction. And every once in a while, he'll look at me. He's like, oh my God, you're such a robot, and I'm like, dude, I worked really hard getting to be robotic about this, and so we'll have this conversation. I'm like, look, I said, I get why you're frustrated. I said, but um, uh, at the end of the day, the lesson that I have learned more than anything else for myself is that I don't trust my own decision making when I am trying to make decisions when I'm pissed. And next, and sometimes more importantly, like it doesn't help me to get, like, there's nothing helpful about me taking something personally. He's been stuck in like VA purgatory. He's trying to get a medical procedure taken care of. The VA between, where we used to live, where we live now, where the procedure's going to be, like, oh my God, like just, and I'm sure you know this way better than I do. It like, and being on the front row, it's maddening. So I can totally understand why he will sit on the phone I think on Monday he did like 12 phone calls, like all over the country, trying to get like this person to talk to this person who said no, we need it. Like, and so like by the end of the day, he was ready to blow his stack. And he's looking at me, and I was listening to most of it while I'm trying to work. So I'm just like, oh my god, he's gonna have a conniption. But the thing is that when we have this conversation, he's like, I don't understand how you stay so calm, and I'm like, well, I don't always. Like, let's be clear, I don't always. But when it comes to something that I know I can't influence, and where I know that my best course of action and the best thing I'm going to be able to do to get to the other side involves staying calm and not letting something get under my skin, then it's a lot easier for me to say, okay, look, whatever the hell I got to do, I got to do. Because getting pissed, for me, it's like yelling at receptionists, right? If you call someplace and you want to talk to like the man in charge or the person in charge, I guess, like, dude, don't yell at the receptionist because she's the first person who's going to hang up on you, or she's the first person who's going to say to their boss, yeah, I got a pissed off guy who's being a jackass here on the phone and he's, yelling at me. So you want me to tell him you're not around? So again, like you just have to kind of remember there's a context and everybody has their own shit they're dealing with. And I think your point about holiday season and triggers is we could do a whole episode just on that, right? Because holidays, I mean, under normal non 2020 COVID election circumstances, man, there are people for whom the holidays suck from beginning to end, no matter what. And they bring up all kinds of stuff. But you want to take that plus being stuck at home, plus sick family, plus not being able to see your friends and family, like you want to factor all that stuff in. Oh my God, just light a match and watch it blow up because there's so many triggers that would not normally even be a thing for most people, right? I think this is another thing to think about too. And I kind of like the holidays as an example for this. I think, we all have triggers, but some of them are closer to the surface than others. And I think if you think about triggers in terms of depth, there are some things that only someone truly close to you can really, really get you, right? In my experience, siblings and spouses, man, siblings and spouses, I have found are the ones who know those, and there are things that only those two groups of people, like even parents, a lot of times can't quite find that same degree of just that those two groups, right? Parents have are kind of can live at their own, get to their own layer, your friends. But I think, other things like COVID or like the holidays can sort of surface some of those triggers a little bit more where, they are more accessible, or where that, what, if I listen to another goddamn Christmas carol on the radio in the car, I'm gonna break something, and like that's a dumb sounding thing, but there are plenty of things that, like, when you break them down, they kind of sound ridiculous that they're getting under your skin, and they wouldn't necessarily always. It's the same reason that when we're already in a bad mood or we're having a bad day or someone else is that, all of a sudden you're like yelling at the dog or something. It's like, the dog didn't do anything. You were just already in a bad mood. And I think that's the part to keep in mind as well, is that, learning to compartmentalize, I think, is one of the most important things that I started realizing was that I was being really bad when I was younger about this one thing over here really pissed me off. And I was just sort of spraying, anger at every other possible direction, and getting better about saying, all right, I feel justified that this person here pissed me off, but I need to deal with this person. I don't need to inflict my anger on everybody else. And starting to do that for me, again, journaling is really helpful, because I think sometimes it's really easy. And again, Brene Brown talks about this a lot, right? We kind of inflict the most shit on the people who are closest to us, in part just because they're there and they're accessible. And especially in a time when we're stuck at home with each other all the time, it can be really, really too easy to have a lousy day and then to take it out on the person you're sitting and having dinner with at night, right? And so recognizing that different things happen, or different things inspire different degrees of response at different times based on those circumstances. And that, what, when you realize something is pissing you off, try to contain your reaction to that setting. Don't allow that to overflow into everything else.
That is well said. And yeah, that compartmentalizing and not allowing spillage, as much as possible, mitigating the spillage is, again, keys to the city right there. Nah, I love it. It was a good
I
one.
think that's a really important key to actually being able to stay happily married
Oh,
too.
100%.
Because
100%.
you like it's so unfair to your spouse to have a shitty
Mm-hmm.
work and then to just, be a nightmare at home. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, nobody wants to put up with that, but you also really don't want to think of yourself as someone who does that. And so developing an awareness that
Yeah.
look, and even and this was actually I think something that especially when you're just trying to get a handle on it, to be able to say,
Mm-hmm.
look, honey, I love you. I had a horrible, horrible day,
Mm-hmm.
crappy mood. I don't want to take it out on you, but right now I am just spitting nails. I need to go do whatever I need, but I need to veg. I need to go for a run, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Again, it's back to that language and being able to say, okay, look, I don't want to take this out on you.
Yeah.
But right now, I kind of don't trust that it's not just going to ooze everywhere. So I'm asking you to a tell me if I'm letting it slip, but b I'm also telling you that part of what I need right now is space or food or what I'm going to go to the movie, whatever the hell it is, right? Because if you can't find a way to articulate what's going on, it's really hard to ask for what you need, and to open the door to be getting feedback back. Again, it's to your point about language. All of that is dependent on you understanding yourself well enough to know, yeah, I'm ready to burn that person's house down. Like, so I'm mad now, right? And if you can't find a way to get that out your mouth, you can't ask for help. You can't, warn people like, just, hey honey, I'm in a lousy mood. Please just, I'm gonna go sit, I'm gonna go in my office, I'm gonna close the door. I don't want to take anybody's head off. So I'm just warning you, I'm gonna just go be a hermit for a few hours and like do
Yep.
my thing. Whatever it is, you have to be able to say it. Otherwise, you're not gonna get anywhere.
There it is. There it is. Now, this is a good one today.
It's because this is bringing up like all kinds of stuff right now, right? To your
Yeah, it
point, like,
is.
oh my God. And again, timing, it's holidays. The holidays do it like I said, under normal circumstances, the holidays will do it. And forget
Yeah.
now, like all of it. So, all righty, my friend. Well, I hope you have a glorious week.
You too.
All
Talk to you
righty.
soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.